Welcome back to the Brittany Hughes Show. Happy Thursday, everybody. So last week, Democrats were up in arms over the detainment and potential deportation of a Hamas-loving terrorism sympathizer. I talked last week about Mahmoud Khalil, who is a Syrian-born Palestinian green card holder in this country who was here in the United States getting a degree from Columbia University, which I think at this point is useful as maybe dog kennel liner and not much else. And he spent his off hours leading anti-Israel, anti-America protests, where he praised the October 7th massacre of over 1,000 Israelis, including, of course, toddlers and infants. He passed out pro-Hamas propaganda, etc., etc. And all of that was perfectly fine, of course, with Joe Biden, who was probably not even knowing what was going on at the time, you know, if we're being honest, too busy wandering the White House looking for his lost pudding cup while some staffers somewhere were signing all of his important documents with a signature from his electronic pen. And so that's how that went for about a year and change. And then entered the Trump administration, who decided that it's probably not the best idea to have open terrorism shills just parading around our college campuses in our country after we gave them the privilege of a visa. That's probably not a good idea. After all, you know, they might end up, I don't know, stabbing somebody or blowing something up or ramming their car into a parade full of people or something. So Trump went to boot this guy out of the country back to whatever crap splat place would take him. And the left absolutely lost their minds because, after all, they are about free speech if you're burning a flag of the country that has graciously allowed you entry and gave you a place to study and a safe place to live and a place to, you know, protest the government stomping around and saying whatever you want about the elected officials here, like you're not allowed to do in, I don't know, Gaza, for example. So that was last week. Now, leftists are absolutely outraged and losing their minds, going absolutely apoplectic over a whole new set of deportations. This time, they're stumping for the rights of violent criminal gang members who are here illegally to be allowed to stay in the United States illegally, despite having crossed the border unlawfully to get here in the first place, and despite being, you know, violent criminal gang members. Did I mention that? This particular story has been extremely telling as to who exactly the left will come out and openly defend, how far they're willing to go in their quest to allow droves of illegal alien migrants to invade this country at all expenses necessary. So earlier this week, as I'm sure you heard, there was a left-leaning Democrat-appointed judge, an activist judge, who ordered a flight carrying illegal alien gang members that was bound for El Salvador to turn around. Not that that did a whole lot of good. We'll get to that in just a second, but still, I guess you've got to give liberals props for their tenacity in defending unlawfully present criminals with a bent toward murder and rape and assault and theft and drug trafficking and, you know, a slew of other crimes that we should be moving to deport all of these people. This shouldn't even be an issue worth discussing. And yet the left. So this was an Obama-appointed U.S. district judge named James Boasberg, and he issued an order last Saturday that put a 14-day stay on the deportations of some 200 to 250 or so Venezuelan gang members, which the Trump administration had justified and slated for deportation using an 18th century wartime declaration called the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which he used to group Venezuelan gangs and gang members under this category, the category of alien enemies, which is exactly what they are, by the way. They are aliens, they are illegal aliens, and they are enemies of this country. And the Trump administration had struck a deal with El Salvador and their president, who had agreed to take custody of these guys, which, by the way, included members of both Tren de Aragua, the notorious Venezuelan gang, and MS-13. These were not just, you know, random, might be an illegal alien just standing outside of, you know, the 7-Eleven in Bakersfield or whatever. These are verified members of transnational gangs, some of the most violent, notorious gangs on the planet. But apparently this judge, Boasberg here, wasn't quick enough on the draw when it came to making sure that these people got a chance to stay in this country in violation of our immigration law and, at the expense of the American people and fellow immigrants who would be victimized by the crime that these people like to perpetrate. By the time he had issued his order, staying all of these deportations of violent gang members, if I have not quite emphasized that enough here. There were already 2 plane loads of these guys in the air with a flight path for El Salvador, so whoopsie daisy. Boasberg issued a verbal order for these planes to turn around. He did not put it in his written order. I guess he just, told the bailiff to go get Delta on the phone or whatever and tell these planes to turn around. And in case you were wondering how that went, the Trump administration continued with the flights anyway and summarily dumped these gangbangers in El Salvador, where they were met and transferred to a supermax prison that, by all accounts from the clips that I have seen, does not look like the kind of place that you want to be, which is exactly where violent gangbangers who, have stock in trade in murdering people and raping little girls and, assaulting people and robbing people blind and trafficking both people and drugs, that's exactly where they belong. And the Trump administration is now arguing that because the planes were over international waters and outside of U.S. airspace at the time, that the judge's order was invalid. They're also arguing that the entire basis for their plan, the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, is valid and is applicable and gives them a solid legal basis to give all these jackholes the boot, because we have a major problem right now in this country, if you have not noticed, of activist judges gunking up the works and making it nearly impossible to deport illegal aliens, including violent criminals. We've got activist judges who are making it virtually impossible to implement any kind of government reform that actually reflects the will of the American people. We have activist judges who are, actively stumping for taxpayers to have to foot the bill for transgender surgeries for violent criminals. Just this past week in Illinois, an activist judge ruled that a transgender, quote unquote transgender, so a trans-identifying, mentally ill, gender-deluded pervert who is a biological male, be given sex change surgery at the earliest possible opportunity on the taxpayer dime, because apparently it is more important to protect the feelings of gender-deluded murderers than it is to protect American tax dollars. So this is Autumn Cordellione. He's a biological male. He is currently serving a 55-year sentence in an all-male prison in Indiana for strangling his 11-month-old stepdaughter to death in 2001. Now, since he's been incarcerated, not only has he decided that he is now a man who identifies as a woman, as of 2020, by the way, he's also declared that he is Muslim. At one point, he sued the Indiana Department of Corrections for refusing his request to wear a full hijab in keeping with the Muslim dress code for women outside of his cell. That's a big no-no according to the dress code for this prison, for obvious reasons, right? You don't want some inmate walking around in full head-to-toe covering where the only thing that you can see is their eyes. That is a safety risk. That is a security risk. The dude could be, he's already proven to be a murderer who has absolutely no problem strangling an infant to death. This isn't exactly the kind of guy you want walking around covered head to toe, able to smuggle around whatever it is underneath his clothing. And of course, you're not allowed to ask because he now identifies as a Muslim woman. The Indiana Department of Corrections, of course, told him, no, you're not going to be doing that. And so he already sued. He did lose that suit, but now a Clinton-appointed judge has ruled that this guy, who, again, let me emphasize here, is in prison for murdering a baby and is clearly mentally ill, is clearly not all there, must be given gender reassignment surgery at taxpayer expense, of course, quote, at the earliest opportunity. So this is federal judge Richard Young. He ruled that Autumn Cordellione, who was born Jonathan Richardson, by the way, must be provided sex change surgery paid for by the state, and this is despite a state law that bans the use of taxpayer dollars to pay for sex change surgery for inmates. The ACLU filed a suit in defense of Cordellione, claiming that the state is denying him his gender mutilation surgery and that violates his 8th Amendment right against cruel and unusual punishment. And apparently, we have a whack job, science-denying activist federal judge who agrees with that. This shouldn't even be a debate. This shouldn't even be a question. And yet, here we are because of the left. Judge Young wrote in his decision on March 5th, quote, "The court ordered that the commissioner of the Indiana Department of Correction should be preliminarily enjoined to take all reasonable actions to secure Miss Cordeleone," again, we're talking about a biological male here, "gender-affirming surgery at the earliest opportunity." The order went on to recognize that the surgery may take time, as it will be provided by a surgeon who is not affiliated with either the Indiana Department of Corrections or its contracted medical provider. It is therefore the court's intention to renew this preliminary injunction every 90 days until the surgery is provided. So that's what we're dealing with here. That's the kind of nonsense, that's the kind of activism from the federal bench that we are dealing with here. It is making it nearly impossible to implement any kind of reform to uphold common sense. We have activist judges demanding that the Trump administration rehire people who have been laid off thanks to the downsizing of the executive branch of the federal government. We have activist judges demanding that Trump reinstate transgender, trans-identifying people to the military, despite the fact that that threatens the readiness and the capability of our military and threatens the safety and security of our other troops. We have activist judges who are making it nearly impossible, not just to change things, not just to implement reforms, but to implement basic common sense, to bring back a modicum of just basic decency that the left has completely thrown out. We are in bizarro world here, and part of the reason why it's so difficult to pull back from that is because of activist, politically motivated judges who are intentionally using their position from the bench to issue order and rulings that benefit pretty much anybody other than the American people. And in particular, American taxpayers. This is not just, a balance of power thing here. And so now the left is claiming, and by claiming I mean lying, claiming that all of these gang members that Trump just booted out of here are not actually convicted criminals. This is the kind of crux of their argument. They're implying that some of them might not even be gang members in the first place, and that Trump must just be, rounding up random Venezuelans on the street and calling them gang members and using that as an excuse to ship them off to a Salvadoran prison, which is not what's happening, by the way. But so squawked the hens over on The View this week, which, if you didn't know, is a program owned by ABC News. This is a show that is actually billed as a news show. Here's Anna Navarro over on The View suggesting that Trump is just a racist who hates all Latinos, hates all brown people, is targeting Venezuelans in particular, and is falsely labeling them all as gang members just so he can deport them. Here's that.
He is reportedly about to put Venezuela in a ban list so nobody from Venezuela can travel here. And frankly, every time he opens his mouth about Venezuela, he portrays Venezuelans as if they were members of a gang, as if they were Tren de Aragua, when it's less than 600 people that are suspected of being part of this. Most Venezuelans are great people, good, hard-working people who want to live in freedom, are contributing to our country, are contributing to our society. A lot of them are my friends, are my neighbors. They live in Miami, and what he is doing to Venezuelans is disgusting. But you know what? You voted for that. You're finding out.
You just got to keep your eyes open, y'all. Because if they can just come up and take somebody because they've made a decision that you're supposed to be that person, any one of us could find ourselves being deported to some country.
Don't give them any ideas, girl.
Well, listen.
I'll tell you what should be a crime but isn't. Being this stupid should be a crime. I mean, these women honestly are dumber than a hammer and a lot less useful. So the working theory here, right, is that just, Trump went and just nabbed some people off the street because they were brown or looked like they might be undocumented or whatever, and called them Tren de Aragua or MS-13 and put them on a plane. And then we've got Whoopi Goldberg, who, is best known for playing a nun, like in some movies back in, the 80s. I do like to remind people, by the way, that she also voiced a cackling hyena over on The Lion King. So I think that's much more apropos for her. We've got Whoopi saying that, Trump could just deport any of us if he felt like it. He's rounding up criminal gang members who are here illegally, and apparently to her, this means that he could just pluck any of us out from our living rooms and boot us if he felt like it. You could be next. This is fear-mongering to the lowest common denominator. There are people, apparently, who actually listen to this and believe this stuff. I mean, you have to have spent your entire childhood gnawing on lead paint and dunking your Oreos in bleach to be this stupid. But apparently here we are. No, Ana Navarro, by the way, Tren de Aragua is not just like 600 people. It's a transnational criminal organization. It has been designated a foreign terrorist organization by the United States Department of Homeland Security, and it's believed to have over 5,000 members and growing, by the way. They were not known to be active in the United States at all until 2021 under Joe Biden, after he first took office, and he opened the floodgates of the United States to millions of illegal aliens, including, human traffickers and gang members and rapists and murderers and other assorted flesh-covered bags of human excrement. So now we get to deal with all of them. This is the same gang, by the way, that she wants you to believe is like a handful of people who aren't really a threat and nobody should worry about them. This is the same gang that took over entire apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado. Remember that? Democrats told us that it wasn't happening and that it was all just a giant right-wing conspiracy until somebody took a video of a bunch of Latino men going door to door in an apartment building, shoving AR-15s up people's noses, and then all of a sudden, the left was like, all right, okay, well, yeah, that's happening. But if we're being honest, these were kind of crappy apartment buildings in the first place. These were run by a slumlord, so don't really worry about it. Never mind all the people who are actually living there, right? These are crappy apartment buildings. They were in a bad part of town anyway, so nothing really to see here. Oh, by the way, this is only happening in a single complex. This is only one building that has been taken over by the violent transnational gang. Nothing to see here until people in a building like, right down the street, all of a sudden they started complaining that armed gangsters were coming to their door and demanding rent in cash. So now we have multiple buildings getting taken over by this Venezuelan gang that wasn't even in operation here in the United States just a few years ago. And all of a sudden, this was not just some conspiracy theory anymore, right? Kind of like COVID and all of the data manipulation and all of the government corruption that was going on that we were screaming about at the time, that we were being told, no, that's just a right-wing conspiracy. That's not actually happening. Nobody's manipulating the data. Nobody's giving you false information in order to control your behavior. Kind of like the Hunter Biden laptop story that wasn't real until it was. Or, the FISA court that couldn't possibly be abused or politically weaponized until it was. It's amazing, is it not, how many right-wing conspiracy theories have turned out to be 100% completely true. And the gaslighting continues. So now we've got ourselves a Tren de Aragua problem here in the United States, because Joe Biden left the front door wide open and stood off in a corner drooling on his own shoes while God only knows who came into our home and started trashing it. And now you've got Trump left to clean up the mess that's all over our floor and a whole bunch of activist judges trying their darndest to keep him from being able to do it. Again, this should not be a debate. We're not just talking about all of the illegal aliens who committed a crime by coming into this country illegally and staying here illegally, but otherwise are not violent criminals, are otherwise not gang members. We're not even talking about that. Okay, that's a related but separate discussion. It should not be a political issue at all. It should be a widespread agreement that at least the criminal aliens, at least the violent gang members, at least those that you can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt are affiliated with transnational criminal organizations, should be booted out of this country. We do not want them here. We do not need them here. People are victimized and affected here by their presence. And everybody, I don't care if you are a Republican or a Democrat, liberal or conservative. I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care whether you are a judge, a president, or just somebody out living their life. We should all be in agreement that these people should not be in this country and we need to remove them forcibly if necessary. This is not just a few hundred people scattered over half a dozen countries and they're just, spray painting some walls on a street that nobody ever walks down. These are some of the most violent, depraved creatures on earth. By the way, 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungare, you may recall her name. Her mother was invited to the address to the joint session of Congress, the kind of sort of State of the Union that we just saw in February, and was honored by Donald Trump. Of course, Democrats sat there with a stick up their butt, completely ignored her, refused to applaud. She's the mother of Jocelyn Nungare, a 12-year-old middle school student in North Texas who was found sexually assaulted and strangled to death under a bridge in the middle of the night by two Venezuelan illegals, both of whom were affiliated with Tren de Aragua. This is the kind of heinous violence we're talking about here. And it happens again and again. On October 14th of just last year, police found the body of 59-year-old Angel Samaniego in Stamford, Connecticut. His alleged killers were two Venezuelan migrants with Tren de Aragua, whose names I won't even bother trying to pronounce, A, because I'm not sure that I can, B, because they're not worth the effort, and frankly, their memory should be scrubbed from human history. But they were arrested in New York after allegedly using a credit card that they stole from the victim, who had been bound and shot execution style. That's what we're dealing with here. The Federation for Immigration Reform also documents the case of two illegal aliens, one from Colombia, the other from Venezuela, who were arrested on October 19th of last year after a 15-year-old girl who had been missing for a month was found to have been sex trafficked by this illegal alien couple. According to the police, the sex trafficking victim would hand over half of her earnings from prostitution to these illegal aliens who were trafficking her. She was also forced to pay half the cost of the motel rooms, where at just 15 years old, she was required to have sex with men ages 18 to 50. So Inurbert Alberto Blanco, who is the Venezuelan illegal of this pair, had been previously arrested for attempted murder in New York City after shooting at a man in the Bronx. He had narcotics charges in Miami. According to the New York Post, he is a suspected Tren de Aragua member and had been first caught illegally crossing into Texas in May of 2023 under the Biden administration. He was ordered removed, but for some reason ended up in a holding center in New Jersey and freed a month later, because New Jersey is a sanctuary state. That's the kind of monster that Joe Biden spent 4 years letting walk right into this country without so much as holding up a stop sign to make sure they crossed the intersection safely. That's what we're dealing with here. If Ana Navarro actually wants to be intellectually honest and call this what it is. Also on the plane to El Salvador, by the way, remember, were members of the notoriously violent MS-13 gang. They should need no introduction. MS-13 is a Salvadoran gang and a transnational criminal enterprise. There are at least 10,000 members in the United States alone as of 2018. They recruit minors in particular. Many of their victims are also minors. They turn kids into killers. They are well known for having no qualms about killing infants and women. And their preferred weapon of choice is a machete. Bodies upon bodies, many of them teenagers, have been found across the United States, including in the shadows of Washington, D.C., dismembered and disemboweled at the hands of MS-13 members. These are gangs that might be in your kids' high school. This is who the left is crying big fat crocodile tears over Trump deporting. They absolutely hate this president so much. They hate you and they hate this country so much that they are now publicly defending allowing violent criminal gang members who rape little girls and chop people up with machetes to be allowed to stay in this country, even if illegally. In fact, one of the main cornerstones of their argument is that even if these guys that Trump just kicked out, even if they are all gang members, right? They haven't all been convicted of a crime here in the United States, and therefore they don't deserve to be deported despite being here in the country illegally. ABC News, the same organization that brings us The View, which is, again, like the media version of herpes. It's very unpleasant. We can't seem to get rid of it. ABC News published an article entitled, quote, "Many alleged gang members deported by Trump didn't have criminal records in the United States," ICE says. The article quoted ICE Acting Field Office Director of Enforcement and Removal Operations Robert Cerna as saying, quote, "While it is true that many of the Tren de Aragua gang members removed under the Alien Enemies Act do not have criminal records in the United States, that is because they have only been in the United States for a short period of time. The lack of a criminal record does not indicate they pose a limited threat. He went on to say that ICE personnel, quote, carefully vetted each individual alien to ensure that they were, in fact, members of TDA, using victim testimony, financial transactions, computer checks, and other investigative techniques, and that ICE did not simply rely on social media posts, photographs of the alien displaying gang-related hand gestures, or tattoos alone. Although I'm fairly certain that having MS-13 scrawled across your forehead would probably be a good indicator. Of those who did have criminal convictions in the United States, by the way, on the people who were on this plane, many had been arrested for murder, assault, harassment, and drug offenses. According to CERNA, more than a few of them had been arrested or convicted outside the United States. At least 5 of the men were subject to Interpol notices for alleged crimes, including rape, kidnapping, child abduction, corruption, and possession of illegal firearms. He also noted that while some of the men were arrested or encountered during federal law enforcement raids while they were in the United States. That's what we're dealing with here. That's who was on these planes. But I guess a slew of dead bodies or rape victims or trafficked children isn't good enough for leftists. They want to make sure that every single gang member gets a crack at stabbing somebody to death or raping a middle school student or chopping up somebody and leaving their body parts strewn in a ditch somewhere. Now, call me crazy here, okay? But I'm on the side of deporting illegal aliens who shouldn't be here in the first place, who came here by unlawful means, and who have no legal right to stay here, particularly if they are verified known members of transnational gangs. I'd like to ship them back to their hellhole before they have the chance to chop somebody up with a machete. I don't know. I don't need to wait until we start finding body parts in the azalea bushes. I'm good. Maybe that's just me. But the left has dug in so deep into their commitment to defending illegal aliens, no matter what, no matter who they are, no matter the cost to everybody else in this country, no matter the cost to Americans or other migrants, no matter how many children die or are, assaulted or trafficked on the way to, get here through Central America. No matter how many videos we have of toddlers literally being dropped from the top of border walls, no matter how many bodies we find in the desert, no matter how many people have to be murdered or T-boned at an intersection because of some drunk illegal who didn't even have a license, no matter how many communities are overrun by homeless migrants, how many public schools are drowning under the weight of thousands and thousands of migrant children who are hopelessly behind academically, who do not speak a lick of English, and who take thousands upon thousands of dollars each in resources from the children of taxpayer families. No matter any of that, no matter the litany of negative repercussions that mass illegal immigration has on the fabric of this nation, leftists have committed themselves to all of this, hook, line, and sinker. They do so shamelessly and unapologetically, and they're now so mad that Trump is kicking out violent gang members. If that doesn't just blow your mind, and they are fighting tooth and nail over it. This is not some small issue for them. Ilhan Omar, congresswoman from Minnesota, who's not exactly the sharpest tack in the community bulletin board. I get that. She once famously called 9/11 hijackers, some people who did something. So her history of shilling for violent murderers is pretty well established at this point. She complained in a speech back in January that Trump using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 was unfair to, quote, immigrants like criminals.
The Trump administration's immigration policy is a threat to immigrants like criminals.
So that's it. We're being unfair to the criminals, God forbid. That's who the left's bleeding hearts just gush over. Not Jocelyn Nungare, not Laken Riley, not Rachel Morin, not Debrina Kawam, who was the woman who was set on fire by an illegal alien from Guatemala who was high as a kite and lit her on fire while she was sleeping on a New York City subway just a few short months ago. No. That's not who the left is upset about. They're upset that we're being unfair to criminals. And you notice that Ilhan Omar does what all of the leftists do, which is she uses the word immigrant as a substitute for illegal aliens. An immigrant is someone who comes here legally because they respect the country that they're moving to and the laws that govern it, and they come here with the intent to stay and to assimilate and to become part of the fabric of this country and to make it stronger and better. That's not what we're talking about here. These are not immigrants. These are illegal aliens, and it is an insult to immigrants to use those terms interchangeably. Specifically, we're talking about illegal aliens who mean to do us harm. And Ilhan Omar is worried that we're not doing enough to protect them, not the people they victimized, not the people who are at risk by their very presence. We're not doing enough to protect the criminals. How in the world this woman, who is clearly not interested whatsoever in representing the welfare of the American people that she is supposed to represent in Congress, who stumps for criminal gang members and terrorists openly and repeatedly, how in the world she is still occupying a seat in Congress is beyond me. Not only are we deporting the criminals that the left loves so much, Trump is using a law that they say is old and that therefore renders it invalid. Trump is using a 200-year-old law to kick all of these people out. He can't do that because apparently a law being old means that it's no longer applicable or somehow doesn't matter anymore. I didn't realize there was a statute of limitations on the effectiveness of a federal law. So Tom Homan, who is ICE's, the new ICE director under the Trump administration, he's probably the absolute best pick for that job that you could have possibly had. I have met this man multiple times. His experience in this field is absolutely unparalleled. And I will tell you, having met this man, having spoken to this man at length multiple times, there is no one who cares more about the welfare of human beings, including illegal aliens, by the way, than Tom Homan. There is a reason that he is so desperate to implement border security, because he has had to pick up the bodies of dead children out of the desert. He has held children as they died because they were locked inside a sweltering 18-wheeler for hours upon hours at a time after being dumped by their human traffickers. That's what this man has done. That is what he has seen. I have literally watched him cry over some of the stories of what he has encountered. This is not someone who is uncompassionate to human beings or human life or even illegal aliens. There's a reason that he wants immigration done in a correct and orderly fashion that preserves human life and human safety, including human life in this country that is threatened by criminal aliens. And I think he had the absolute greatest possible response to some idiot reporter this week who asked him about the effectiveness of using an old law to deport gang members. Watch this.
Those who claim you're using a 200-year-old law to circumvent due process.
An old law? Not as old as the Constitution. We still pay attention to that, don't we?
But some would say this is...
Well, he asks if we still care about the Constitution. I would say less and less these days, especially if leftists get their way. I think they would probably replace the Constitution with, a DEI handbook and a pronoun dictionary and a recipe for kombucha or whatever. But point well made, right? Yeah, it's an old law, but it's still applicable. And by the way, maybe we wouldn't have to resort to a 200-year-old wartime provision if we had simply followed the law the way that it is written in the first place. We wouldn't have this problem. The law states that there are lawful ways to come into this country and there are unlawful ways, and you are treated differently if you choose an unlawful way. If you want to claim asylum, the law states that you must do so from the first safe place that you can get to after fleeing from wherever it is that you're running from, and that you must qualify for asylum by having a well-founded fear of persecution on account of your race, your religion, your nationality, your membership of a particular social group, or your political opinion. My country is a crap hole and the economy sucks and I don't have any money and my street is run by the cartels is not a qualifier for asylum. It's a fantastic reason to want to come to the United States. I don't blame you one tiny bit. But you need to queue up and you need to file to come here legally, and then you need to assimilate into this country, into this culture once you get here. Because you recognize that your culture was lacking and that you didn't want to be there anymore. and that the culture of the United States created something better that you want for yourself, for your children, and for future generations of your family. That is what immigrants throughout history have done and were expected to do, not just in the United States, but anywhere else that you might migrate. At least that's the way that it used to be back before the left went up and lost their minds. And now we've got problems that we didn't have before. Getting dumped on the banks of the Rio Grande by a human trafficker in an inflatable raft and making your way up through the bulrushes and turning yourself into a border agent is not a legal way to claim asylum. And if you are here in violation of our immigration law without any documentation stating your legal claim to be here, you are committing a crime and you are subject to deportation. And how we go about all of that, given the mess that we have found ourselves in, is up for debate. That is a very expensive proposition, a very expensive plan to take on. There are ways of doing it, I believe, that don't actually require manual forcible deportation. I believe that if you simply make it impossible for people to get jobs, if they do not have a legal right to have a job in the United States, if they have no legal documentation stating their right to work in the United States, the problem tends to solve itself, okay? But that's not even what we're talking about here. We are talking about criminal gang members. And the left is bending over backwards, doing all kinds of gymnastics that boggle the mind in order to defend criminal gang members. That's how far they've lost the plot. These are not even liberals anymore. These are leftists. This is a radical mindset. There is a reason why Trump is currently enjoying his highest approval rating ever, and the Democrat Party's approval rating is in the toilet at historic lows. There is a reason. It's because they have completely jumped the shark when it comes to their platform. They have gone just so wildly far left, they're not even in the realm of basic common sense. They're nowhere within sniffing distance of it. And now we've got to have a discussion about a 200-year-old law that most of us had never even heard of, and whether or not we should be letting violent gang members into this country because we don't want to hurt their feelings by kicking them out. Unreal, the place that we have found ourselves at. Unreal. With that, that's the Brittany Hughes Show for today. Thank you guys so very much for joining me. I'll see you back here next Thursday. In the meantime, head over to the Apple Store, hit the subscribe button on the Brittany Hughes Show. That way you won't ever miss an episode. You can also subscribe to the Newsbusters podcast with Tim Graham on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. You do not want to miss that one. I'm telling you, you are making a major mistake if you do not subscribe to the Newsbusters podcast. I will see you guys back here next Thursday. I hope you have a fantastic weekend and a blessed week ahead.